Hi, welcome to PMP Certification Study Group. In this lecture, we are going to cover the topic of earned value management. This topic falls under the knowledge area of cost management. So before we dwell deep into this field of earned value management, let us first see that what is value here. Value is nothing but consider yourself a sponsor and try to look at the project. For a sponsor, it is very important that a project brings in money. That is what is value to a sponsor. So when we talk of earned value management, what we are trying to say is, how are we analyzing what value the project is bringing to the organization that is doing the project. Now while we do our mathematical analysis, there would be certain terms or measurements that we'll be using, and then using those measurements we'll be using formulas to calculate and reach to certain results, and based on that results we are going to perform our analysis and suggest what needs to be done in the project to control costs or to manage costs. Now you will always see three types of prefixes to these measurements. One would be planned. So if you see a thing called planned value, that means that is what is your expectation is as per your plan of the earnings that you may have from the project. If you see a prefix called actual, it will be actually actual costs, and that would be the investment that you would be doing from your side in expectation of the planned value. And based on whatever work you have done and the assessment of the client is going to give you earnings, and that would be specified as earned value. So planned value, actual costs, and earned value. So at this point of time we have discussed three inputs that may be used in earned value management. Let us also understand one more point, that the formulas that would be using these values can also be divided into majorly two types: ratios and differences. Ratios will give you an idea of how the project is trending, and differences will give you an absolute value of these measurements, and you can derive meaningful inferences out of these two types of measurements. In the following slides we are going to see these types of formulas, and that will give you a better understanding of what these ratios and differences mean. So let us now understand few of the measurements. BAC, budget at completion, is nothing but the total budget of your project. There is another term called planned percentage complete, and as the name indicates, it basically shows that at any point of time in your project, what was the planned completion of work to happen. So the example given here, suppose the team was to finish 300 hours and the total duration of the project is 1000 hours. So at that point of time, the planned percentage complete would be 300 by 1000, expressed as a percentage is 30%. Now if you have these two values, BAC and planned percentage complete, you can find out planned value, which we have discussed earlier. So the example given here, for any project, suppose BAC is $200,000 and planned percentage complete at any point of time when the project is going on is 30%. So then PV would be BAC into planned percentage complete, which in this example amounts to $60,000. Remember the formula, PV equal to BAC into planned percentage complete, where BAC is nothing but your budget of the project and planned percentage complete is what you have planned to achieve at that point of time. So that percentage of BAC is your planned value. Let us now discuss a numerical that involves all these measurements. So in this numerical, if you see, the total scope of the project in terms of number of windows is 200 windows, and also in terms of weeks the total scope is 16 weeks. Another point to make note of is that it says that each week of the project costs the same. After having said that, we are being told that the members are paid out $4,000 and there is an additional cost of $1,000 every week. So the total cost every week for the project is $5,000. Now let us see what calculations need to be done to find out the answers of the questions. Firstly, we need to find out the overall budget of the project so that we can use the formula PV equal to BAC into planned percentage complete to arrive at the planned value 4 weeks into the project. So, as we had discussed before, the total cost per week is $5,000, and since the total scope of the project is 16 weeks, so the overall budget of the project is 16 into $5,000, which amounts to $80,000. So after having find out the budget BAC, now the second part of the question says that what is the planned percentage complete 4 weeks into the project. So the total scope is 16 weeks. So we have planned that 4 weeks it would be 4 by 16 expressed as a percentage. Okay, so we have discussed the measurements around the planning, and we also know what is the budget. But what is our performance? For that we need the actual figures. For example, a statement like the actual cost of this project is $1,650 on May 14th and the planned value is $2,200. Now how do we get these actual measurements? Well, you can get these figures from the performance measurements that you continuously do over the course of a project. If you remember, work performance information is input to many processes, and we also do work performance measurements which are seen as outputs of a control process. So these are the sources of getting the actual data from which we can infer the actual value measurements. After having discussed the planned and the actual, let us now discuss about earned value. So earned value at any point of time will tell you how much your project has earned at that point of time. The formula for earned value is BAC into actual percentage complete. So like for planned percentage complete, you will always have some data, direct or indirect, that will tell you what is the actual percentage complete. Keep this in mind that for figures like BAC, planned and actual percentage complete, you will have data in the question and you will have to infer these values from that data. If you remember, we had 16 weeks and we were asked, the question was that what is the planned percentage complete? 4 weeks. So we knew that PV percentage here is 4 by 16. So in a similar fashion, you will have data given and you will infer these values, and based on these only you can do further calculations for EVM. Let us now develop further on the same numerical and add another question to it. So the question is that you are 4 weeks into your project and you check with your team and they say that 50 windows were to be installed but only 40 have been installed. So what is the actual percentage complete? So remember, we had used weeks to calculate the planned percentage complete. Now we can use windows to calculate the actual percentage complete. Since the information given is about windows and it is told that only 40 have been installed, so in terms of windows, the actual percentage complete can be found out using windows installed upon total windows to be installed, which in this case is 40 by 200, which expressed as a percentage amounts to 20%. Please make a note of how we are calculating these values like planned percentage complete and actual percentage complete based on the data that is given. So now we have data on actual percentage complete. Let us add another dimension to this question, which is what should be the earned value at this point of time. Now you have done 20% of the work, which is actual percentage complete. So by the formula of earned value, which is BAC into actual percentage complete, you have earned the value which amounts to 20% of $80,000, which is equal to $16,000. After having done these calculations, now look at the main question as a project manager, which is based on these calculations, are we delivering what we planned? In the context of this question, the answer is certainly no. Let us use the number of windows as a data to find out why we are not delivering what we planned. So as per the question, we were supposed to install 50 windows, but we have installed only 40. So the planned percentage complete was 50 upon 200, as a percentage is 25%, whereas the actual work done is 40 upon 200, as a percentage it is 20%. Hence we can say that we are not delivering what we have planned. Let us now have a look at few of the ratios and differences that we had mentioned earlier. So if you have a question like, is my project behind or ahead of schedule, you can have a look at a ratio called schedule performance index, which is a ratio between EV and PV. So what does it mean if your SPI is greater than 1? Mathematically, obviously it means that numerator is greater than denominator. In terms of earned value, it means that the value that you have earned is greater than the value that you had planned. Well, if SPI is greater than 1, then it means that you are ahead of schedule because you have earned more than what you had initially planned. You have delivered more than planned, and that is a very good news for any project manager. So SPI has told you that you are ahead of schedule, but don't you want to know by how much you are ahead of schedule in terms of value? This is a place wherein the differences come in. So the difference to look at here is schedule variance, which is EV minus PV. Remember, SPI is EV by PV and schedule variance is EV minus PV, which is a difference formula. What happens if your SV is greater than 0? Obviously it means your earned value is greater than the planned value, which means you are ahead of schedule, and you also know by the exact value by which you are ahead. SPI at that point of time will tell you whether you would stay ahead or with the passage of time difference would reduce. For example, imagine that at any point of time your SV is greater than 0 and 3 weeks later you see that your SPI now is less than 1. That means within that period your SV would have already reduced, because the trending that is indicated by SPI is indicating that. So this is the way you can actually correlate differences and ratios. So far we have talked about the planned and the earned values. But what about the costs that have gone inside to generate that value? If those costs are more than your earned value, then rather than earning money, you are bleeding money. So far we have looked at a figure called budget at completion. Now in the exams you will get this figure called actual cost, or you will have to infer it from the problem statement, the way we did in the case of number of windows given or number of weeks the project would last. There is another figure, or I would say a ratio associated with cost, that is called CPI or cost performance index, similar to SPI. But here the PV is replaced by AC. It is EV by AC, that is earned value vis-a-vis the cost incurred to earn it. So can you tell if CPI is less than 1, then what does it mean? Well, CPI less than 1 means that you are spending more to earn less. That is blasphemous. Your sponsor will fire you. Thank God you have EVM to monitor it. We have talked about a ratio associated with the actual cost, which is your CPI. Can you tell what would be the difference associated? That is your cost variance. The formula for cost variance is similar to the formula for schedule variance, except that now the value that would be subtracted from EV will not be PV, but it would be AC. So please drive home this fact that in the two ratios and the two differences that we have seen, that is your SPI, CPI, your SV and CV, EV is there in the numerator and EV is the value from which a subtraction happens. In the case of SPI or CPI, EV is the numerator and the denominators change. They are PV for SPI and AC for CPI. And for the differences similarly, the value that is being subtracted from EV would be PV or AC for SV and CV respectively. For schedule, remember the comparison is between earned and planned, whether it is a ratio or a difference. and for cost, the comparison between earned and cost, both in ratio and difference. The EVM methodology also provides you means to forecast your performance. So far, whatever we have seen is the analysis that we are doing at a point of time in the project. But there are measures like TCPI, which is called True Complete Cost Performance Index. Using that, you can actually predict what is the CPI that your project should have from now on, so that your budget is within the amount specified by BAC. So the formula for TCPI is BAC minus EV divided by BAC minus AC. Let us now try to understand the numerator and the denominator in this formula of TCPI. If you have a look at the numerator, it is equal to BAC minus EV, which means that out of your budget, if you subtract the earned value that you have earned so far, what is the value left to earn? Similarly, the denominator is equal to BAC minus AC, which means that you have already spent cost which is equal to AC. So from your budget, the cost that you can afford to spend from now on is equal to BAC minus AC. So in a way, TCPI is the value left to earn divided by the cost that you can spend to earn that value. Remember that in EVM measurements, lower is always the loser. If you have an SPI or a CPI which is less than 1, that means you are a loser, you are behind schedule, and you are over budget, which makes sense also because CPI is equal to EV by AC. So it being less than 1 means that your actual cost, which is the denominator, is higher than your earned value, which is the numerator. So you have spent more and earned less. Similarly, for SPI, which is equal to EV by PV, your planned value, which is the denominator, is greater than your earned value, which is the numerator, which means that whatever you have planned, you have actually not achieved. Similarly, for the differences formula, schedule variance and cost variance, if they are negative, in other words, it means that your AC and PV are less than EV, then it means that you are again behind schedule and you are over budget. Think of the formulas and you will understand. Let us now look at a question to better our understanding. So if you see in this question, it is given that your current project is $800,000 and there is a team of programmers and they will work for 6 months. So in terms of months, it means the total effort for the project is 6 months, and the total effort in terms of hours is given as 10,000 hours. Always remember that in numericals, first write what is given and write it in terms of the EVM values like BAC, planned percentage complete, etc. So here if you see, it is written that as per schedule, you should be done with 38% of the work. That means the planned percentage complete is 38%. Similarly, on ground, in reality, your project is currently 40% complete. That means your actual percentage complete is 40%. You can express these percentages either in terms of dollar value if you take them as percentage of $800,000, or you can express them in terms of months if you take 6 months, or you can take them in terms of number of hours if you take 10,000 hours. Now it is written that you have spent 50% of the budget so far. That means you can find out your actual cost, which is nothing but 50% of your BAC, which in this case is $800,000. So let us now first write down all the values that are given. So as discussed, the values are BAC is given as $800,000, total effort in terms of hours is given as 10,000 hours, the planned percentage complete is given as 38%, the actual percentage complete is given as 40%, and the actual cost is 50% of the budget, which would amount to 50% of $800,000, which is equal to $400,000. Now the question asked is the project ahead or behind schedule? First ask yourself, what are the values in EVM that you need to calculate to answer this question? Since we are talking about schedule, we got to use the measurements used for schedule, which is SPI or SV. If we use SPI, then the formula is EV by PV, which is equal to 40% of BAC divided by 30% of BAC. Since BAC is common, it would cancel out in maths. Simply 40 by 38, which amounts to 1.053. If SPI is greater than 1, then we can safely say that project is ahead of schedule. For the moment, if we forget EVM, then also based on the data given, which shows that planned percentage complete is 38%, actual complete is 40%, it clearly means that the actual performance is better than the planned performance. So the question now is, should you consider crashing the schedule? Well, the answer to that is obviously no, because you are already ahead of schedule, although it is noteworthy to mention that since SPI is 1.053, it means that you are just about following the schedule. Now we have checked the project from the schedule perspective. Let us now have a look at it from the cost perspective. So the question here is your project over budget? So again, think what you need to calculate to answer this question. So we can either have a look at a difference formula for cost, which is cost variance, or we can have a look at the ratio formula, which is CPI. So going by CPI, which is equal to EV by AC, in this case it is equal to 40% of BAC divided by 50% of BAC, simply 40 by 50, which gives us a value of 0.8, which means that your CPI is lower than 1. In other words, it means that you are earning less and spending more. You are over budget at this point of time in the project when you are doing this analysis. We have seen one forecasting formula, which is your TCPI. And other than that, whatever we have seen are the formulas that pertain to judging the performance of a project at a point of time while we are conducting the study. Basis that and the trend that is reflected in SPI or CPI, we can predict what our values are going to be of budget if the trend continues. For that, there is a measure in EVM technology that's called EAC, or estimate at completion. So EAC is equal to BAC upon CPI. Now to understand this formula, you have your budget, which is BAC, and your cost trend is reflected in CPI, as we had mentioned that these ratios represent the trend. Assume that your CPI is less than 1, which means that currently at that point of time you are over budget. Now if you continue like this, then you would end up more than BAC in terms of your budget. Now EAC is equal to BAC upon CPI. In simple maths, if denominator is less than 1, then EAC has to be greater than BAC. For example, if you divide 5 by a fractional value like 0.8, the answer is 6.25, which is greater than 5. So now you can appreciate why EAC would be higher if CPI is less than 1, which also means that if your CPI is less than 1 and you are over budget, then obviously your end budget has to be more if the trend continues. We have had a look for forecasting formulas based on ratio, as EAC is a ratio based calculation. Now let us have a look at difference based calculations also. So the first difference based calculation is ETC, which is estimate to completion, the formula for which is EAC minus AC. Assume you go to your sponsor and say that I am going to exceed my budget the way project is going on, and your sponsor says, okay, I agree to your new budget, which is EAC. Then what is the amount that you can spend now in the project, from now on in the project? That will be equal to the new approved budget, which is greater than BAC, which is EAC, minus the cost that you have spent so far, which is equal to AC. So now if I were to ask you what is the variance in your budget, variance here means the planned budget that you had initially, which was BAC, and the new budget that you have, the difference between that is the variance at completion, which is another difference formula in forecasting. So VAC is equal to BAC, which was your original budget, minus EAC, which is the new approved budget by the sponsor, which is higher than your older budget based on the trend that you are having, which shows that you are over budgeted. If VAC is negative, it obviously means that your new budget is more than your older budget. And if EAC is less, that means that in terms of costs you are doing well. Time now to look at a question to understand these forecast measurements that we just saw. So here if you see, the overall project time is 2 years or 24 months. if you see the second bullet point, it says that it is 9 months into the project out of those 24 months. So you are doing the analysis after those 9 months. The BAC is given as $4,200,000 and you have spent, which is equal to AC, and that is given as $1,650,000. You have got a CPI after 9 months of 0.875, which obviously means that you are over budget. You have spent more and earned less. Now, since there is a mixed performance by teams, as is written in the first bullet point, that some teams are ahead and others are falling behind, and there are cost overruns in some areas, but you have saved in other areas, and you want to have a look at the overall picture and predict what is going to happen. We will use EVM to do that. Let us first jot down all the values that are given in terms of EVM measurements. So as specified, the given values are BAC, AC and CPI. Now think what are the values you can calculate based on these figures. For us to do the forecasting for the budget related figures, we need to calculate EAC, ETC and VAC. Let us see how we calculate these values. We calculate the values of EAC, ETC and VAC using the formulas we discussed before. Now, basis these values, what are the inferences that we can derive? Let us have a look at them. So we see that CPI is less than 1, and if we continue like this, then our new budget, which is EAC based on the current performance represented by CPI, would be $4,800,000. Now if we subtract EAC, we will get the value of ETC, which is the cost that we can afford to spend based on new budget, which amounts to $3,150,000. And overall, from our initial budget of BAC, we will have a deviation of $600,000 with respect to the new budget. Now suppose you do the same analysis 6 months later, which is overall 15 months later. Now the actual cost stand at $2,625,000. You find that the project is 70% complete, which is your actual percentage complete. And now you have to again modify your forecast based on this latest situation when you are analyzing after 15 months. The previous one you had analyzed after 9 months. So let us see what are the values now. So the values given now are AC is equal to $2,625,000. BAC is the same, which is $4,200,000. And since actual percentage complete is 70%, so EV is equal to 70% of BAC, which is $2,940,000. Basis this, we can calculate CPI, which is equal to EV by AC, which comes out to be 1.12. So one difference that we see is that after 6 months, our performance has improved and now we are well within our budget. Now we will calculate EAC since we are in budget now, hence our EAC has to be lower than BAC, which is true also, which comes out to be $3,750,000, and the ETC now is $1,125,000, and the variance here is positive. That means your BAC is greater than EAC. That means that if you continue with this performance, you will actually end up spending well within your budget and your cost would be better. Let us see the inferences from these figures, and after 15th month what is going on in the project. So firstly, since CPI is greater than 1, your project is within budget, and VAC means that you will have a savings of $450,000. If you remember earlier, we would have gone beyond our budget, but now we will be having savings. That means that within these 6 months, after those 9 months, we have actually covered up. So we have shown better performance and hence these favorable results. Just to reiterate the concept of TCPI, which is 2 complete cost performance index, the formula for TCPI, as we had seen before also, is BAC minus EV divided by BAC minus AC. So let us see the basis of this formula and understand it. The numerator here is BAC minus EV. So from your budget, whatever value you have earned so far, if you subtract that, that is the value left to earn. So value left to earn is represented by the numerator. The denominator is BAC minus AC. So you have spent the amount which is equal to AC. So to stay within budget, whatever amount that you can spend now is the subtraction of AC from BAC. So TCPI is equal to the value left to earn for you divided by the cost remaining that you can afford to spend. If you freeze your budget to AAC and you cannot deviate from it, then TCPI actually is the CPI measure to attain to accomplish your target of staying within the budget. Imagine a situation where you go to your sponsor based on your calculations and say to the sponsor that you will not be able to finish the project within the budget, and the sponsor agrees to your new budget, which is EAC. Then there is a new formula to use for TCPI, which is the EAC based formula of TCPI. If you analyze the second bulleted point, here the only change vis-a-vis the previous formula is that in the previous formula the denominator was BAC minus AC, here it is changed to EAC minus AC. What is the implication of that? Well, numerator remains the same, which is BAC minus EV, which is the value that is left to earn, because if you are spending more, your costs are more, that does not change the value the project holds. So if you modify your budget, then it becomes EAC. Then you have a look at the denominator. Denominator is equal to EAC minus AC. So BAC, budgeted completion, has been replaced by estimated completion. Now with the new budget approved, you will obviously have more cost to spend than what you were spending if budget had been BAC. Because of that, the formula of TCPI is now changed since the sponsor has agreed to the new budget, which is EAC. So if you increase the budget, then with the new approved budget, TCPI is the CPI that you should attain to ensure that project finishes within the new approved budget. With this, we come to the end of this lecture on EVM. Please revise this presentation and then practice certain questions to get a good grasp on the EVM technique.